Hello, this is podcast number 7, continuation of the series The Way to Soul Consciousness. This podcast is called Setting Up a Spiritual Practice, and it will be in 3 parts. This will be the one talking about the spiritual practice, setting it up, and also we're going to talk about meditation in this one. When you are serious about your personal transformation, you'll create your own spiritual practice. Establishing a practice will greatly enhance spiritual transformation. There are thousands of types of practices one can adopt, of course. Major question for the spiritual seeker to ask is, what is the benefit of a spiritual practice? With the soul as a guide, it helps you through every possible trial and growth and every expansion of consciousness up to final liberation. This podcast begins the discussion of the 3 main pillars of a spiritual practice, which is meditation, spiritual study, and service, selfless service. This description is described in many spiritual texts, such as the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, dating back over 2,000 years. Employing this ancient formula will aid in uniting the body, the mind, the emotional astral, and the soul into a working unity. At some point, you'll realize there's no separation between what you know, how you perceive yourself, and the actions you take. An effective spiritual practice will also reveal who you are and who you are not. This is a nod to the spiritual axiom of know thyself at all levels of awareness. Combining these 3 aspects allows you to come to recognize what your thoughts, or that your thoughts, feelings, and expression of will are expressions of energy and force, just as what a esotericist would use his mind or her mind to discern. With this knowledge, it brings the realization and expanded awareness about the nature of your existence and how you interact with the world. Implementing the 3 pillars, it becomes a process of integration of the personality with the soul, and later with the pure spirit, the monad. By fully embracing and incorporating all aspects of the spiritual practice, you are developing a livingness of soul consciousness in your life. So here are some initial goals to work towards in setting up a practice. The spiritual practice is a discipline, and it must be nurtured daily. During using the first pillar, meditation, you will learn to integrate the mental, emotional, astral, and the physical etheric bodies into one functioning unit in order that they will act together with the soul. You want to learn to acquire an intelligent or mental understanding about how the head, through love, giving, and sharing freely, and the mind, through right thinking, work together, expressing a more harmless, caring, and loving behavior. Known esoterically as love wisdom, this is most readily facilitated by an integration of soul values such as cooperation, goodwill, and harmlessness. Having a spiritual practice will help to balance and stabilize the emotional and thought life in subtle ways with the soul, just by its contact. By learning about energy, vibrations, and patterns, any limitations in consciousness can be transformed. As you are purifying anything that blocks your true nature, you will also be cultivating a discerning mind. Keeping a spiritual journal is an effective tool for observing and studying the effects of harmlessness, anger, and fear in your consciousness. Train yourself to become the observer in both spiritual study and meditation. While contacting your soul and integrating its values, such as goodwill and harmlessness, your capacity for greater service expands. You'll come to realize your purpose in the world is not just to evolve your personal processes, but to help humanity grow into a more prosperous and creative civilization. For the remainder of this podcast, I'll be describing the first pillar, as I mentioned before, of the spiritual practice, which is meditation. From the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali called meditation the science of union. Meditation removes all layers of ego. As you delve deep within your mind, you'll find the true nature of the soul. The science of union is an ancient spiritual concept about blending the lower matter of the mental, emotional, astral, and the physical bodies, the etheric too, of the personality with the higher vibrational matter of the soul, or the divine. The word yoga in Sanskrit means union. Yoga here has two meanings: union with the divine and as a means towards that union. The object of this practice is to describe rules for achieving unification with the divine through prescribed discipline and techniques. These will allow you to reach the highest spiritual development. In this work, you're consciously bringing together the parallel forces of the personality and the soul in an effort to train the consciousness to act as one. This inevitably results in purification of the mind and body through a process of transference, transmutation, and transformation. In esotericism, these processes occur through the practice of Raja Yoga. This is a practice of self-discipline, discernment, discrimination, and purification. Transference involves the thinker consciously changing the flow of the lower vibration of thought and feeling to a higher vibrational or higher vibratory quality of the soul. This activity causes a transmutation and transformation in thought, which results in an alignment with the concrete mind, conceptual mind, and the establishment of rational thinking and a balance of the emotional astral with the physical etheric nature. So with this practice, you as the aspiring, remember, you're aspiring to make all these things happen with the soul, you'll be able to align the mind towards becoming rightly oriented with the higher vibrational energy patterns of the soul. So the practice of esoteric meditation. For anybody wanting to consciously tread the spiritual path, learning to meditate is a must. Meditation is the best way to integrate your mental, emotional, and physical etheric form, that is, your threefold personality, into a sensed oneness with the soul. Meditation describes a process of how to experience the mind in its true or natural state. In this philosophy about meditation, you are not trying to create a peaceful state necessarily, although this is a byproduct. You are creating a direct experience of who you truly are in your natural state, which is the soul consciousness. The practice of esoteric meditation directly connects you with the soul. The term esoteric meditation is used to infer that you will be encountering various thoughts, emotional energies, and other forces. As an esotericist, you are ever mindful of completely subduing any emotional reactivity. You will want to negate anger, separatism, and a me-only mindset in order to create a stable consciousness free from these distractions. A daily meditation practice will eventually help to establish a continuity of consciousness with the soul, that is, the soul being present in your consciousness all the time. This will not happen immediately, but gradually over long periods of time. A well-trained mind, free of fears, anger, and selfishness, will be able to better perform selfless service. With a stabilized consciousness, you will learn to live life consciously, spreading your light, love, and wisdom without any conscious consideration of how much you give. In this way, you're becoming a living example of the teachings. Through these methods, you'll learn how to transform the mind so that it can become a useful tool for expressing the soul's purpose, which is service. So let's talk a little bit about transforming the inner realm. When going into meditation and entering the realm of your inner mind, it is wise to have an awareness about your tendencies in relation to the higher self and its virtues. In this space, you are learning several things. First, you are learning about who you are and who you are not, and about the forces that make you up. Using mental techniques, which I'll be describing shortly, you are transforming the mind. Recall from a previous podcast, you are taking your personality energy and merging it with that of the soul. This will help you to balance out the emotional, astral energies and the concrete or conceptual mind. When you begin to change the reality within, you will note changes in the outer environment of your thoughts and feelings and how they play out with other people you encounter. It is not enough just to feel good after meditation. You'll also want to learn to remove all things that keep you from being peaceful, contented, and creative. Your inner world of the mind is the place where ideas begin and conflicts are resolved. Meditation prepares your mind for practicing discrimination on different levels of the mental plane and for the purpose of expanding your consciousness. When you are not distracted with dark, separative, and selfish thoughts, which most people have, you can expand your creative inner world and find it to be a remarkably vital and transformative space. So let's describe a few goals in meditation. Your purpose in meditating is to establish and maintain a direct connection with the soul. So in order to do this, you'll want to identify realistic goals and conduct an honest assessment of yourself by asking the following questions. Why am I meditating? What are my motives, my attitudes, goals, and purpose as I enter meditation? Answering this helps to establish a mental approach, a thinking mental approach, and learn to practice conscious awareness in all your mental activities. So what keeps you from realizing the oneness of your soul? If you find any limitations such as fear and anger, etc., then what are you doing about transforming this energy? So let me briefly describe one of the techniques, perhaps one of the most important techniques you can learn for transforming some of these limiting anger, such as fear and anger. So there's one called the technique of light, and there's also the as-if technique. I'll describe both of them first. The technique of light is quite simple. It can be complicated, but I'll make it simple. It's basically go into meditation, quiet yourself, let go of all thoughts and ideas, and just simply be in a space of beingness, which means awareness also. Don't have any thoughts whatsoever. Just simply be quiet and still. So what you do is you have a sense of the presence of the soul. And you also have a sense of the presence of your personality. Now, you're not thinking necessarily, but now you're going to have to bring in a thought form. You're initially not thinking, but now you're going to bring in the idea of what is making you angry or what is making you fearful. So what you do is you hold that energy of that fear, that anger. Don't necessarily, you look at it sort of intellectually. Don't necessarily get into the feeling of it, but know it's there present. And the soul's energy there is present. Now merge the light of the soul, that energy, that tension of the soul together in your consciousness, and merge those two together, because the anger and the fear are part of your personality. The soul's energy does not have that. So you want to merge that light of the soul together with that of the personality and let that bathe in the space of where the anger or the fear are. And you might have to do this a number of times in order for you to dissipate that energy. And you'll find very quickly, perhaps it could happen immediately in your meditation here, or it can happen over a period of a couple of days maybe. But you'll find that this energy has dissipated and it's transformed. This is the power of transformation and transmutation. Transmutation being the energy of the thought, which is energy in itself, or the emotion, the feeling. Those are energy from an esoteric point of view, and then you're just transforming those with the light of the soul. The as-if technique I mentioned is just like that. It's simply you're acting as if you already know how to do it, or how to fix it, how to remedy it, how to pacify it even. So just as an actor walks out onto the stage to whatever environment he or she is in, a stage, in front of cameras, whatever, they are acting as if they know what they're doing. You know how to heal this problem. You know how to heal this pain, this fear, this anger, whatever. And so you act as if you already know, because you have the soul's presence in your consciousness, and you let that energy sit there. You may not know all of the answers, but you at least have that soul's presence to be in that light and that transformation to help you get through this. It's that simple. You may have to do this a number of times, as I said, but you just keep at it. Now, for continuing with goals to achieve, an initial goal in meditation is to create an alignment of the mental, emotional, and the physical, or the threefold nature, and see yourself as one with the soul, as I talked about before. By integrating these three major parts of the personality, you become a complete functioning unit or an integrated personality. This, again, will happen in stages. So these are goals that you initially set and you work towards. Another goal you can work towards is identifying with the concept that the soul's energy is a tension and a light, or it's an intelligence, is a presence, as I said, in consciousness, and it's always in the background. It isn't there always, it isn't just in your consciousness when you're meditating, it's there in your waking life too, but you've got to become sensitive to that energy. You just need to realize and align with it. Learn to stabilize your mind and hold this tension steady in the light of the soul energy. A more advanced goal, which will be much later in your spiritual practice and time in the future, would be to learn to directly experience the soul's consciousness as a state of beingness and pure awareness without thought. This will entail developing an inner capacity for inner seeing, listening, and connecting with the plane of the intuition. As I said, this will be a much later type thing. First, you've got to work with stilling your thoughts. Learn to use your mind as a tool for stilling the thoughts and any aberrant feelings you may have. Aberrant meaning they're feelings of the personality. It's not to say that your emotions are wrong or anything, but you want to transform them, because feeling angry is a natural process when you don't understand the energies involved. Once you understand those and you work with the energies of the soul together, then you'll learn to transform those energies, and you'll come from a space of knowingness and responsiveness, which I'll talk about a little bit later. As you progress on the path, you'll learn that observation and listening are very similar. So, for example, you meditate in silence and you listen for impressions from the higher self. So let's talk about some prerequisites for meditation. Many meditators fail to make real progress because they don't pay attention to the prerequisites developing of good concentration, which is critical before meditation can begin. You'll discover that meditation begins once concentration has been established. You'll understand that actual meditation is a state of consciousness wherein you retrieve information directly from the soul or the Buddhic plane after reaching a meditative state. So you don't receive your information necessarily from spiritual study. We'll talk about that in the next podcast, but you understand that you want to put your personality and your concerns aside and just be in a space of listening and the presence and that tension of the soul. Any information that can be typically in the form of impressions or impulses due to the direct communication with the soul. So I want to talk now about a few practical and, quite honestly, ancient methods for providing an essential teaching on meditative concentration. Just simply to establish a good foundation for meditation practice, the meditator, you will want to follow the following general guidelines. Of course, you want a calm space, which of course is noise-free and peaceful surroundings. And this means turn off your phone or anything in the environment that stimulates the mind. It's best to have few wants and desires in your life, as desires keep your mind agitated and unhappy. So if you're worried about where the money's coming from, that's a real concern, totally valid. You're worried about your work situation, you're worried about you just had an upset with your significant other, or maybe your children, whatever. Just this space, this time in meditation is for you. So let it be just your time and be quiet and be. It, of course, also goes without saying a life of pure ethics. For example, right living and harmlessness. Needless to say, harmful activities in the heart and the mind will greatly disturb the mind, such as lying, stealing, or sexual misconduct. These actions create karma and negatively impact the mind. Stop the flow of intellectual thought, or monkey mind chatter, as it's also called. This has to do with fantasy daydreaming, intellectualizing the teachings, for example, and or using the finite ego or of course, the conceptual concrete mind. The nuance here is that the meditator, are using your imagination for fantasy purposes. And the intention is to be focusing on making soul contact. So if, for example, you, the meditator, are using a visualization, this activity can help during the mind in alignment with the soul. Using another nuance is as if you are thinking in intellectual or worldly ways, and this will keep your consciousness associated with all things of the conceptual world, concrete mind. Part of the goal is first to experience the higher abstract mind. I know these are terms that could get you lost in this, but the abstract mind is that quiet, still space while you make contact with the soul. Then connect higher still with the realms of the Buddhic plane and beyond. Connecting with the Buddhic plane is a more intermediate to advanced idea. First, you want to still the mind of all chatter and all activities going on. So you can not think about the laundry or going shopping or getting gas in your car or something like this. So just put that aside for now and let this be your space. So your posture. It's best to have the body placed in an upright position where the body is relaxed but cannot fall asleep. The vertical uprightness of the body allows for the etheric energies to flow between and around the chakras to flow properly. One of the goals of meditation is to establish the intuition and to practice conscious awareness. Right posture will directly aid in this process. So another one is self-observation. This is an activity of directed attention where you observe the thoughts and feelings that impede your conscious and concentration or practice. So you'll learn to become the observer. I'll talk about this a little bit later. The object of concentration. Initially, it's important to point out that the concentration is not meditation. Concentration is used initially to focus and discipline the mind and hold your initial focus in order to develop comprehension. Well-established concentration practice is the ground from which the flower of meditation can expand, and this is done by directing the attention toward the object of meditation. Concentration becomes a method for attaining knowledge and acts as an instrument for illumination. So, to make the long story short, you focus your attention toward an object, such as which will aid in focusing the mind. And this helps you to prepare for meditation. It can be like focusing on a sacred image, like, for example, the image of a candle or even a real candle. If you want to meditate with your eyes open, if you can do that without being distracted. You may want to focus on the image of an evolved being, for example, maybe Mother Mira or Alma, or perhaps an image of the Christ, for example, or Mother Mary. But don't think about the teachings, just think about the evolved consciousness and concentrate on that. You want to focus the breath. You can be using pranayama, which is rhythmic breathing. This can create a calming sensation in the mind and the etheric and the physical body. You can be part of the pranayama or breathing. You can also be chanting the word Om, like Om, and do this repetitively over and over again until you've focused completely on the practice of the breathing and the rhythmic chanting of this. This is sounding. This is also called sounding, to say the Om, like I just said. To deepen your meditation, you can use a seed thought like the Om, for example. The affirmation or a mantra or a chant. Another one can be like, I and my soul are one, or I am love, truth, and beauty. These can be focuses of your mind and establish your concentration practice. So the mantras and affirmations can help to focus your thoughts for repatterning and overcoming emotional hindrances. You may want to search out specific affirmations for focusing on purifying the emotions and perhaps even any activity or any actions of reactivity. This exercise can be useful to eliminate hang-ups, angers, and fears, and you'll also have to experiment what's right for you, of course. So as I mentioned before, meditation begins after the tension of concentration is released. At that moment, there's no thought or feeling, but a space in awareness between the thoughts. So, example, I talk, and you see, did you hear that blank space? There was nothing there, and it's like there was no thought in between that. So it's at that moment, there's no thought, but there's a space and an awareness between them, as I said. That space is a state of awareness and beingness, and it's a significant goal to achieve. After reaching a meditative state, you can retrieve impulses from the soul. That'd be impressions. These can be impressions, ideas, insights, wisdom, or guidance. So let's talk a little bit about the concept of comprehension. I've examined hindrances and obstacles in previous podcasts and a little bit here on this podcast. As you're moving on the path, you want to have a deeper understanding about your integration with the soul. Observation here does not necessarily have to be in or during meditation. It can also be in quiet reflection, during spiritual study, and attentiveness in the waking mind. And I'll get into more detail with this when we talk about spiritual study in the next podcast. So a question you may pose to yourself here says, what am I spiritually learning and comprehending? It can be a teaching or a more advanced study about learning how to control or repattern those thoughts that do not work for you, an issue that comes up. Look at yourself honestly and then decide the best course of action. Spiritual study develops knowledge and the intuition, and from this you gain experience and understanding or communication with the soul. That intuition is developing. You're sensing why you're doing something, and you want to determine the source of the material in question or the energy in question. I'll be covering, like I said, in the next detail about this in the next podcast. So what you want to do is you want to learn to identify with your own thoughts and phenomena and that you experience in the inner world and as part of yourself and not somebody else's. So you be aware of the process, and this will take responsibility. You'll take responsibility for your own thoughts and know that these are your thoughts and not someone else's. So you want to incorporate discrimination and discernment in your consciousness and learn to make wise, conscious choices and become clear in thought and action. For example, learning about the difference between right and wrong, and you ask yourself, do I see this situation in stark terms or are there shades of gray? Learn to create a new intentionality with your thoughts by making all of your life and activity of sole purpose. Learn to trust the intuition. Learn to entrust your impressions, your insights. In the more advanced studies of meditation, this awareness becomes more regular and inevitably will become a continuity of consciousness. Continuity here means that you're able to hold the tension of the soul, and so you're aware of that presence, so it becomes a continuity in your consciousness. That's going to be more the intermediate, more advanced. It's going to take some time to get that. After a measure of purification, you can begin to experience pure awareness and a direct experience of your higher self in its natural state, free of the distractions of the lower distracting energies. You begin to see that you have a choice in all that you do and not be controlled or disrupted from every thought or feeling. Thus, you can learn to hold your consciousness peacefully. The meditation process is also a means to slow down and observe how the mind works. If you wanted to really get into this teaching, you can read Patanjali's books on the Yoga Sutras, which are 4 books of minutiae about how the mind works in every possible way. So let's talk a little bit about the Yoga Sutras. In my book, The Way of Soul Consciousness, which this entire podcast series is based on, under the section of purification and obstacles to overcome, I talk about the hindrances can be any action or thought or emotion that prevents or delays or interferes with the spiritual seeker, meaning you, from directly connecting with the pure nature of the soul. So you have anger and fear, like I talked about, any of these energies, any forms of reactivity. You just have a knee-jerk reaction toward, oh, he just said that or she just said that, and that just sets you off. So that's called reactivity. So you want to learn how to balance that out with the higher energies of the soul coming through you. For overcoming obstacles and hindrances, we turn our attention to the wisdom of the Yoga Sutras. These were devised, as I said, by the Patanjali, Indian mystic over 2,000 years ago. And he taught that by practicing what is called yamas, Y-A-M-A-S, and the complement of niyamas, N-I-Y-A-M-S, that these are considered to be the first two practices for working with the inner self in moving towards spiritual union. These practices represent a series of ethical rules, goals, and commitments for right living. Rightly practiced, they will affect your relations with your higher self and others. So the word yama is a Sanskrit term, an ancient Indian language from India. Yamas are ethical principles that deal with one's behavior and how one interacts with the outer world. And they guide the student, meaning you, to follow the proper conduct, such as practicing harmlessness and becoming non-reactive. So the 5 commandments, or yamas, are, the first one is harmlessness, which I've spoken about before. This is the principle of nonviolence, non-harming of other living beings. This is thought and action. The second yama is truth. It concerns the right use of speech. And there's an expression saying, before the voice can speak in the presence of the master, it must have lost the power to wound. So this refers to eliminating any forms of not going. So yes, you want to be speaking truthful, being honest. You don't lie, and that's how you conduct yourself. So then there's a concept of abstention from theft. These are taken from the Yoga Sutras, these descriptions. So non-stealing, of course, that's physical and in thought. So don't take what's not yours. There's an expression called abstention from incontinence. Incontinence in this meaning, this is desirelessness of any outgoing verbal or physical tendencies and impulses of physical expression in relation to the sexes. So we're talking about other tendencies include pleasure seeking that satisfy the desire nature. So you want to be really learning to look at your, hold back on your desire energy and study where that's coming from. Do I really need this object when I go shopping? I'm going to somebody's home and somebody says, well, this belongs to somebody else, but I really want it. Well, that's what we call, that's something that you desire it. So you need to be looking at that energy saying, this is somebody else's and it's not mine. So that's a form of incontinence, looking at desirelessness of any object. The 5th yama to look at is called abstention from avarice. This relates to the sin of covetousness, or the concept of theft, as I just talked about, on the mental plane. And it concerns the use of mental energy that you do not take anything physical or intangible that is not rightly yours. Okay, now let's talk about the niyamas. That's also a Sanskrit term referring to reining in or restraint or control of oneself as you, the spiritual seeker, practice ethical rules for right living. So the first 5 there were yamas. Those are principles of how to conduct yourself and your behavior. But these are niyamas, or restraints, or how you conduct yourself. So the first one is called self-purification. There's also 5 niyamas. This first one is self-purification, and it means purification and maintaining cleanliness of the body. This is not just in the mind and the thoughts, but practicing good hygiene. Relates to the 3 sheaths of the mental, emotional, and physical etheric bodies, and interpreted that each sheath should be kept clean and free of impurities. This then becomes a study of what the individual attracts to yourself. The second niyama is called contentment, and this means acceptance, satisfaction, delight, and happiness and joy in life. It's understanding that the conditions and the environment in your life, this can serve you by knowing where you are at and how best to work out any issues that allow you to achieve your goals in life. Learn to see it as recognition of your own present assets and opportunities that form the background of future progress. So you have your life circumstances the way they are, and look at the positive things that you have and not the negatives. This is what this is talking about. And then being able to use that as a foundation to work from. The next niyama is called self-discipline, and it means to heal, and infers an inner austerity and passion toward your practice. This refers to a fiery mental effort and steady persistence to fulfill an ideal and understood while you're going into the process of discipleship. This leads to a constant disciplining of the physical body, the steadiness of the emotional, and an attitude of the mind of continual faithfulness, being faithful to your practice, being faithful to your connection with your practice and connection with the soul. This leads to transformations and purifies your mind and your thoughts and your feelings, and allowing your awareness to control unconscious impulses and poor behavior. There's also self-study. This is another niyama, or spiritual reading. It connotes a study and observation of the subjective realities of the self. So you want to establish deep introspection. You may do this during meditation or spiritual study, which we'll talk about in the next podcast. And you'll have discernment, and this is be used to determine the cause behind all desires and aspirations and feelings. You'll want to eventually study the source of discontentment and problems and issues that come up. And this is the ability, self-study is the ability to see divine lessons through contemplation of life's lessons. What am I really learning from this process? And through meditation about the truths demonstrated by great teachers. So you'll be going into spiritual study, as we'll talk about in the next podcast. The last niyama we'll talk about is called self-surrender. This constitutes a heartfelt attitude and dedication of the lower threefold self brought into obedience of the soul. So you want to eventually let your personality, this will take some time to develop this, but you'll have a sense of your connection with the soul and the idea that you want to let the soul guide you, you're walking hand in hand, so to speak, with the soul. This is symbolic, of course, metaphorically, and you want to allow that energy to guide you. And so you want to let go of any problems, difficulties that you have, and listen for impressions and ideas about how to heal this space. So this represents an obedience toward the teacher, which is the soul in this case. Okay, this concludes this podcast. So in the next podcast, like I've been saying, I'll be discussing the second pillar of a spiritual practice, which is spiritual study.